Okay, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, commissioners. And my name's Tammy Cordova. I'm a commissioner in Nevada, and I am the co-vice chair of the task force. Chair Johnson, Commissioner Johnson, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we get started with our educational session today. Uh-oh, I think he might have frozen. We're lucky to have him here with us. There we go.
Yeah, it's very slow.
Okay, I'll keep going. Sorry about that. There we go. There, I heard him for a second. He's traveling, and so we're lucky to have him as it is. So today on our kind of learning series, we're going to talk about volatility.
Perfect. Do you hear that?
Oh, there you are. Okay, let's keep going. Yes, so today we're going to talk about volatility and demand, supply, and price. That's the subject for today. And for that, the way that we're going to do this is we've got a couple of speakers that have presentations that we're going to walk through. We have Larry Dykes. He's the director of gas supply for One Gas. And for those of you that aren't familiar with One Gas, they're a regulated utility in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And then we have Frank Graves, who's going to talk to us as well. He's a principal at the Brattle Group. And he's based in Boston, I believe. Frank, anyway.
Yes, that is correct. That's right.
Great. And then
right now I happen to be in near Indianapolis, but normally I'm in Boston.
Okay. And then we also have John Protano. He's the manager of Origination and Price Volatility Management for National Grid. And National Grid is in New York and Massachusetts. And so the three of them are each going to touch on different points and their experience relating to some of the different types of tools and mechanisms that we can utilize and how that works in the framework of managing the volatility of our gas supplies. So what we'll do is we'll go through with each of them first, and they're comfortable with questions as we go. So please try and utilize your raise your hand function if you do feel like there's going to be questions as we go. I'm going to be the bad guy and make sure that we try and stay as close as we can on task in terms of time, because following our discussion and our question and answer with our expert speakers, then we're going to try and move into some discussion with just the members of the task force. And we've got a couple of commissioners that have volunteered to share some lessons learned in their particular state and jurisdictions on this topic. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll kick it over to you, Larry. Please, the floor is yours.
Very good. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My presentation today is from a utility perspective after working for the company for over 36 years with responsibilities for gas supply over the last 22. If we can go to the first slide, please. For those that are unfamiliar with One Gas, we are a 100% regulated natural gas utility with over 2.3 million customers and more than 100 years of experience. My discussion today is going to cover how gas markets function under normal conditions, tools to manage market volatility, and lessons learned from extreme weather conditions. We go to the next slide, please. Next slide. So this slide is basically a sample of the natural gas cycle, how gas supply functions under normal conditions. It's basically a simple cycle that sends price signals and offers opportunities. In today's environment, we are at approximately the bottom right-hand corner of the cycle, and it's moving clockwise. So with the warmer winter we've had and the increased storage, we've increased supply to the point of 41% above the 5-year average is our current storage position. I'll show a slide on that in a moment. And that has been putting downward pressure on prices. It's reducing drilling, decreasing supply, and increasing demand. This brings higher price trends. That increase will increase in drilling, increases supply, and ultimately decreases the demand for the product. This then puts a downward pressure on price, Producers then cut capital, and drilling slows, starting the cycle over. Next slide, please. This is the storage piece. I just wanted to mention, if you go back one slide, the volatility can, at any point in time, volatility can be introduced into this cycle. You could have weather, extreme weather. You can have storage overhangs like we currently have. You can have economy or geopolitical issues. The next slide does cover the EIA storage. So you can see it's demonstrated here and highlights the current U.S. storage level. The overhang is, as I mentioned, 41% above the 5-year average or 23% greater year over year. This is ultimately pushing downward pressure on pricing. Next slide, please. As we look at the volatility, there are examples here that are demonstrated in this price history chart. Weather, for example, unexpected or prolonged colder or warmer weather patterns, seasonal patterns in storage, economy, slowing economy, reduces demands, growing economy increases demands, or we can have geopolitical issues, policy changes, international tensions, wars, etc., all impact the volatility of the natural gas cycle. Next slide, please. Basically, this is a supply chain, wellhead to burner tip. It consists of producers, gatherers, processors, compressors, transporters, storage operators, marketers, and utilities like OneGas. We're all working to deliver supply to meet the customer's demand. As a natural gas utility, we are on the tail end of this chain, and we competitively bid our gas supply and utilize storage and transportation so we can in turn deliver reliable natural gas to the burner tip. Next slide, please. In extreme weather conditions, not only can we experience disruptions in production, we closely monitor the weather and load forecast while also monitoring pipeline notices. We communicate with our upstream pipeline providers on the status of their operations, and if necessary, we purchase additional gas supply at the city gates. As prices become elevated, there are tools that can be used to help mitigate the price impact. Next slide, please. These tools, one is our supply stack. OneGas has an overwhelming success operationally serving customers during record peaks and strives to continually enhance our system and gas supply portfolio. So what does a portfolio look like? A successful portfolio. To us, it is to develop a portfolio or a plan that is effective to handle the coldest and the warmest of winters. As an example, this diverse supply stack with a combination of pricing types has a combination of baseload supply, some priced at first of month index, some priced at fixed price. It also has storage. Storage is a key and a game changer, a valuable tool, works to manage volatility and balance our systems, and it typically is filled in the off-peak period with summer pricing. Physical callables is another way of adding to the stack. Basically, it's a swing supply. It's priced gas daily or first a month. And having a balance of multiple supply points helps reduce reliance on a single price point. Next slide, please. Our hedging program and hedging helps mitigate price spikes. As an example, you'll want to find your ideal risk tolerance and use a combination of instruments. Some of these instruments include, as I mentioned, storage, very important component to hedging. Also, fixed price baseload. Lock in the price early before you get into the summer period and it's elevated due to pricing for the heating season, cooling season. And to use price cap mechanisms. Financial hedging is also important. Financial calls. We've used Henry Hub and on local indices. We've also used fixed price financial swaps on gas daily. This is especially beneficial during low price environments like we're currently seeing. And then another one is to look at is costless collars. Basically, it can be done financially or physically. It's a great way to protect your supply from any spikes. And in summary, the last slide, please. Examples of our post-significant winter storm changes include increasing storage. As I mentioned, this helps mitigate price spikes and improve reliability of supply. Supply diversification. Work to source your supply from outside the region you're in. Pull from multiple basins to help mitigate regional volatility and supply risks during a winter event. Also, secure fixed price supply. Lock in that price, lock it in early. That will help mitigate price volatility. Utilize CNG, mobilize CNG units into critical areas for added assurance of supplies. The reliance on natural gas is growing. The increase in renewables, coal plant retirements, and the greater reliance for natural gas being a backup is important and has incorporated new peaks into our forecasting models. So keep an open mind. To be successful in this business, we must be flexible. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Did anyone have any questions for Larry at this point? I'm not seeing any hands. One quick question I had for you was, to the extent that this is the strategy that you're utilizing, are any of the states in which you operate, is this something, the strategy that's approved by your commissions, or is it just something that you're implementing based on your own decision making?
We work with our commissions and we meet with them regularly, and we do have gas supply plans that are filed with the commission that spells out our plans.
Okay, great. Commissioner Bennett, I see you have your hand up.
Good afternoon. Mr. Dykes, do you have a sense for how far out you should hedge, considering the current environment that we're in? I used to hedge for a local community that I worked for, and I felt like 6 months out was kind of the longest I wanted to go at that time, but that's been a decade. So do you have a sense for a timeline on hedging, or how far out ahead you should get on the market?
Typically, we're going out. There's multiple components on the hedge, and storage obviously is the greatest one. On calls or swing swaps or any of that is basically for the next winter, and then we'll reload those in the summer for the next winter. But fixed price, that's something that is really good to have, and to the extent we're in a low price environment and you can go out, I'd go as far as you could.
And one last question, if I may, on one of your earlier slides, I believe it was somewhere around 7 or 8. It was number 9. I'm sorry. You talked about, the historical market influence. Is that why are we come down so much? Has the market stabilized in lieu of the Eastern European conflict and the other geopolitical issues that we've been having over the last 2 years?
I've basically been looking at it as we've got this huge storage overhang, and we're seeing prices being stabilized and decreased primarily because of that.
Okay.
And that's a short-term deal. And then we'll ultimately see, like I mentioned, the rigs laying down, less drilling production. And that's when you have that less production online, then that actually increases the demand
Going
for
to put us back into that cycle again
and then you jump back into that cycle, and it'll start going up again, and then people start drilling, and it's just a cycle. But remember, it can be interrupted anytime with the volatility components.
Gotcha. Thank
I
you.
can add just a tiny bit to that if it's helpful. Europe is also in the same situation of overstored relative because they had a warm winter, and the Western European countries moved off of Russian gas more readily than people expected. So, and there's a bit of an overbuild of LNG, so that's pushed back on producing out of the U.S. as well. So this is kind of a worldwide reduction in gas prices.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I see Charlie Inman from the Washington UTC has a question. And you know what, Charlie, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to save that and ask that question of all of our panelists, because I do think that that's broader than just what Larry's been talking about. So let's move to Commissioner Van Nostrand. Sorry if I got your name wrong, Commissioner.
No, it's all good. Thank you. Larry, I wanted to go back to that slide where you mentioned the interruption in natural gas service due to various storm events. And I wondered if we could spend some time trying to understand what the causes of those interruptions were.
It can be a variety of things. And from a gas supply side, my position is I'm really a supply guy, and some of those interruptions may have been related to in the cycle, could have been related to production, it could have been related to compression, it could have been related to power. There's a lot of components in there that I really don't have a good voice to talk on, because that's outside my area where I'm really dealing with the last three components of transportation, storage, and supply. And so our company, we performed very, very well. With the few outages that we had, they were out for less than 24 hours. So we've done a lot of refinement on our systems, and there's the other things is probably more something for somebody on the production sector to talk about any outages or anything that they may have than it would be for me from the utility side.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, moving on. I see Commissioner Ellison, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Dykes, I wanted to follow up on I believe it was slide number 13, where you were showing a potential gas supply, winter gas supply strategy. I'm wondering, I guess, first of all, how you would go about determining what the right amount of storage is, and I guess also when you think about base load, how conservative you are in what you're defining as base load. Are you defining base load for a warm winter or for a average winter?
Yeah, great question. So the way I've always looked at base load, and I mentioned early in the presentation that our stack is designed for the warmest of winter as well as the coldest of winter. And so when I look at base load, if I'm looking at an annual base load, and we also have seasonal base loads, what I'm looking at is what is the lowest injection month, which is typically going to be October, and what is the lowest demand month, which is typically going to be September. And so the sum of those two is really a good number to have as an annual base load that's fixed price, or just a base load, however you want to look at it, to have it so it doesn't get in your way of your injections. And then you can build your stack on top of that. Storage, on the other hand, is as much as you can get is beneficial. And but you also have to have, when you have your base load and your storage in there, you have to look at the maximum daily withdrawal quantities of those storage fields and figure out what is your total demand and what's a good number to use for that, and then leave some aside so you can float with the market. Because as the market goes down, it may be beneficial to have that ability to float with some of your supply, and whatever your mix is, that's what you would want to find out what that best mix is.
Thank you.
Okay, great. That's, I think, all the questions I see right now. Thanks, Larry. Stick around. The next panelist we have is Frank Graves. Mr. Graves, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. Appreciate the chance to chat about this with you folks. I've been involved in helping gas utilities plan their systems both physically for resilience and financially for smoothness over many decades now, and have appeared both as a planner and as a witness to help them justify their plans. So I've seen quite a bit of spectrum of strategies in this. I'm going to mostly talk today about financial hedging, and I want to talk about what constitutes elements of a good hedging strategy or system. How can you tell if it's working? Or put differently, how can you tell if it's prudent? And especially make clear why financial hedging is different from physical resource planning. And that turns out to be a big issue that I want to make sure is clear to everybody. So let's jump in. One issue right away that distinguishes financial activity from planning your physical system is the financial hedging aspect of your business has to be dynamic. You have to adjust it over time with recalibration as the kinds of changes that we just saw have occurred in volatility and prices and storage and weather conditions happen. Because what constituted the risk outlook at one time, early in the year, may be completely different later on that year, or the cost of hedges that you'd like to hold may have gone up or down. And so there's no static decision. Also because these financial positions are mostly short-term, they're a year or two usually. And so you have to roll them over anyway. Whereas if you build a storage plant or you gain a long-term asset. So the process is quite elaborate. You have to decide on what are your design goals and constraints in terms of how much you want to hedge and to what extent. You even have to agree on how you're going to model it, because if you look at those charts we saw of how volatility has changed over time, there's a pretty subjective element to saying, well, what do we think the volatility characteristics of the gas industry happen to be right now? Maybe as we observe, we're in a bit of a quiet period. So does that mean volatility is low, or it's going to, rebound back to where it was? Well, you'll design your hedging plan based on what you think about the characteristics of future volatility. And you can infer that partly from the history and decide how much weight you want to put on that. But you can also infer it from the way financial products are priced in the forward markets, especially options, and decide to lean into those. And you're going to have to decide on things like adjustment rules for whether you want to take a snapshot of the world, hedge to that, and then live with it for a while, or you want to be evolving over time. To make all those decisions, you have to get steady feedback on what's going on. The managers themselves have to be adjusting the type and timing of purchases. They have to be measuring the risk very regularly. Most companies do it daily to see what they think the variance that they face in their yet unhedged portion of their business is. And that's the thing you're trying to control. And then they put out in the better systems quarterly reports or something like that back to regulators and stakeholders to say, this is how well it's working. This is what seems to have changed since the last time we're recommending an adjustment or not. And then you have to agree on, what are the limits of circumstances that you're willing to let the company adjust for and how you recover the cost for that sort of thing. So there's a lot to do, and the better systems review that sort of thing periodically throughout the year and over time. So let's go to the next slide. So another big difference between physical and financial hedging is that if you're doing financial hedging, there is no expected cost savings from doing so. Basically, in fact, you shouldn't even think about hedging to reduce costs. or save money. The goal is to trim the risks of extreme outcomes that you otherwise don't want for other reasons, like it would be too much rate shock, or it would create budgetary stress, or it might make it hard for the firm to raise capital, and we want to stay within certain liquidity depths for the firm. Those are not because the hedges themselves are interesting or attractive. There's and in fact, they're not, when they're efficiently priced, as they are in gas forward trading and so on, there's no money to be gained in expectation for either the buyer or seller, because what happens is you strike a deal with somebody about willingness to trade at some future price, where the counterparty is agreeing to guarantee you that price and you're willing to buy it at that price, or vice versa if you're a seller. And both of you have to think that's an okay deal. So I have a little graph down here that says what the forward price has to strike a balance between what the sellers think is a gain possibility if things turn out to be cheaper than that, and so they're selling at a higher price than the spot market, while the buyer has to be saying, I'm going to save money if prices turn out higher. And those in fact balance such that at the time of entering the hedge, nobody even trades any money. There's no money at all obligated because both of you think it's a break-even deal. And you're also both taking the price. There's no, I suppose you might find a stooge out there that you can trade at that's not, looking at the market. But these are instruments that are priced on in a competitive way. Another thing to be aware of is they don't affect production costs or quantities or delivery terms. They are just ways of saying whatever happens on the production side or on the physical side, we have a financial cap or limit on how much we're exposed to it. The standard financial products are traded for fixed volumes at particular times and places. As we saw a bit before, most gas LDCs hedge a significant portion of their upcoming winter baseload demands net of the amount they think they're going to take out of storage. But there's, as I'll explain in a minute, there's also no right amount for that. But let's talk about physicals for just a second. Since standard products are for fixed volumes in particular places and times, they have to be for quantities you're pretty darn sure you're going to want to take or want to have a price cap on. So that's why we were just hearing it's a good idea to think about kind of your average winter requirement as a number you're pretty darn sure you're going to take. And even if you don't take it exactly, you can clear the amounts you use or don't use back into the market without too much hassle. That doesn't really cover the most extreme events, things that are you're not sure when they're going to happen or how often they're going to happen or how extreme, where there's a lot of uncertain volume, time, and location. Those are more amenable to being hedged with physicals, especially storage, because you fill it and then you have the right to sit on it until you decide it's ready to use, up to some withdrawal limits that are required. And that lets you sort of hold it for the worst conditions if you want. And you don't have to cash it out on a particular day in a particular month. So physicals lend themselves to more of the extreme, more volume sensitive events, and the financials lend themselves to the more fixed portion of what you're going to need. The other thing to bear in mind, though, is if you do physicals, you're not just getting a hedge. It's not just a financial asset with hardware that comes with it. It actually changes the capacity of your system, right? So it's creating a capacity resource which has long-term benefits potentially, and so it can be evaluated on multiple criteria. You want to be choosing those for least cost to meet your peak need. Commissioner Ellison, you asked about, how much should you hold for the peak? Well, you're not going to solve the peak with your financial assets. They will help you hedge the price of covering that peak, but they aren't going to make it more able to cover the peak. That's going to come from your physicals. So if you think you have a design day problem for the coldest day of the year, you want to solve that with your storage and your physicals and your upstream transportation contracts. Then you want to decide if you want to buy some fancy call options to try to limit what it could cost you to take delivery on those days. But the financials don't help you take delivery at all. So again, physicals, more for flexible, more for long-term. They also involve a capacity asset. So they're a little different. Both are great, and everybody combines both. So let's go to the next chart here. The other thing that this brings up is there's really no right amount to hedge. Again, back to the physicals, you can do least cost planning for those and say, if we want to have a probability of X of not being short on the coldest day, we need this much capacity rights. And you can then try to find the least cost way to do that. So in that sense, there is an objective amount of capacity to hold. But there is no right amount or right style of hedging that the hedges themselves tell you about. Part of the reason is because of what I mentioned before. They're priced at a deficient price that doesn't make or save money for anybody. They reduce the variance of what you will face in the future. So they control the width of the departure from your expected cost, but they don't reduce your expected cost. So right away, you can't choose them based on cost. So you have to decide you're going to choose them based on taste. And the taste that matters is the taste of the customers, subject to a couple of constraints about how healthy the utility has to be. So just to give an example of things you want to think about deciding this, suppose it's January 2024, and I want to start hedging the year 2025. Well, one way to do that would be to buy all of your baseload needs for 2025 in January of 2024. Wait 12 months, take that fixed price delivery in the next year, and then on January of 2025, do the same thing for 2026. You would have reduced the risk in the sense that you would have a fixed price for those deliveries in both periods. But because you just bought once in January for a whole year and then waited a year and bought for the next year in 1 January, a year ahead of that, you'd have likely have a huge cliff where the cost would change materially between the two. So you might say, well, we don't want to do that. We want to buy our 25s in installments throughout 2024. A lot of utilities use so-called dollar cost averaging, where they buy, let's say, a 12th of their expected needs in 2025, 1 month's worth, each month of the year. But then that means you're not as hedged in 2024 as you would have otherwise been. Because by July, you've only hedged half of the next year, and you're going to end up buying 1/12 of the 2025 needs in December of 2024, pretty close to the conditions that then prevail. So you're going to get a less hedged price. It's going to wiggle around because you're gradually adjusting it. That can be a good thing because you may want customers to see that prices have gone up or gone down, and you haven't had to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. But you have to decide whether you want to do that or not. And then you have to decide, well, if in 2024, do I just want to hedge 2025, or what about 2026? Many utilities go a couple or 3 years ahead, but usually at a significantly reduced volume. So they might hedge 80% of their base load for the coming year, 50% for the year after that, and 20% for the year after that, and then they drop off. But there's no right answer to that any more than there's a right answer to how much should you insure your house for against extreme risk. It's nice to have the insurance, and but it doesn't reduce the cost of the risks that you face. It just changes the way you pay for those risks, right? And likewise, if you buy insurance and then the risk that you were covering, say flood or tornado or whatever, don't happen, you shouldn't be disappointed that you have insurance because it was protecting you against the thing that didn't happen. So it's kind of actually a happy ending. But it looks like you sort of wasted the money on the insurance. You have to make sure you don't bring that attitude towards financial assets because, again, there were fair deals up front. They may or may not end up in the money, saving you money after the fact, but that doesn't make them good or bad. What really makes them good or bad is were they designed to chip off the right amount of risk relative to what you would have been like if you weren't hedged. So on the right here, I have a little S-shaped curve that shows your typical sort of stylized picture of what the range of potential costs could be, let's say, next year for the average therm delivery. And it could be low, it could be high if you weren't hedged, and that's the S-shaped curve. And it's you read this as a cumulative probability, so there's, let's say, 100% chance it'll be less than or equal to the most extreme number on the far right, and a virtual certainty it'll be above the 0 or whatever the leftmost number is. What you want to do with your hedging program is decide how much of those tails you want to put up with and how much you want to try to trim away. And again, this is like choosing how much home ownership you want to have. It's and by buying different quantities of shares of your load and buying them in different ways, you can change the shape of that tail that you have and calculate the so-called value at risk for how much money is embedded in the likelihood that that unhedged portion will be needed. That's the number you want to manage to. Sorry, I've got a phone ringing here and I don't know how to deal with it. The danger is again, after the fact, you may end up with hedges that you didn't need. And that is a different problem called regret. So to manage risk, you lock down your expectation of volatility. But since it could turn out to be a disappointment that your hedges turned out to not be useful, you have this after the fact kind of risk that you'll be disappointed. If you don't want that risk, you have to do one of two things. You either have to hedge less and just say, well, we don't want to be disappointed, so we're going to not going to commit to the hedges. Or you change the shape of the hedges you want. So you might say, well, we'd love to have the downside, but we don't want the upside. So let's buy some call options because those give us a cap on how much we have to pay in the future. That's fine, but now you have to pay out of pocket for the call option because you're going to have to pay up front for the amount of risk transfer that you're taking off of that distribution. And for that, again, has to be a zero value, net value to both sides of the deal. So you're not saving any money, just like your home insurance doesn't save you any money. It just saves you the worst case payment you might have to make. And then you may end up at the end of the year discovering, whoops, we bought these call options and didn't need them. You should be happy with that. That's just fine. That's a good outcome. It's just as good as if it had gone out the other way, because if they were bought prudently, bought according to the plans you guys jointly agreed with your stakeholders, that's as good as you can do. So let's go to the last slide. So again, to kind of sum up and give a little emphasis on this, this is a dynamic process. It should be reflective of customer needs, and it has to be updated over time. The utility can't intrinsically say this is the right amount to hedge. They can make a recommendation, and they may know a lot about customer variability in demand and under cold weather conditions and stuff like that. But they're just acting as an agent to help the customers avoid these worst case outcomes. And you, the regulators and the customers, have to work with them through workshops or not as non-controversial hearing processes as you can to agree on how much do you want to trim those future costs in exchange for possibility of regret or in exchange for paying for some of the risk protection today. When you do that, you'll be using appropriate modeling, you'll have upfront agreement on these things, you'll update over time, you'll keep track of the changing conditions, and you'll get reports about those that show how are we doing and what do we need to change anything. You'll agree to modify, or you'll have an agreement on when and how to modify and whether to put budgets on these things. Say one quick thing about modifying, and it kind of brings up the intuition that's a little non-standard. It's tempting to say, well, what happens if prices go up and it costs, the market gets more expensive and we wanted to be X percent hedged by next year and we thought it was going to cost about this much, but now it costs more. Sometimes utilities or utility commissions decide to back off their hedging under those conditions. And that's okay, but because it feels like you're buying into a high price condition and you don't want to lock that down. But when you do that, you're actually speculating because the market is saying that is the expected cost now. And if you decide not to take it, you're taking your chances that they're wrong, rather than saying we're just going to take a fair deal here. And it can be very counterintuitive because often when prices are rising, volatility is rising too. So the risk is actually increasing, and that's why the prices are higher. And then they're joint and several. The market is tight. Little differences in conditions matter more than normal. So volatility is high. So if you decide not to hedge when prices are going up, you're saying, I'll take even more volatility than I originally planned on. Conversely, if you decide to hedge more when prices are low, which can be a fine thing to do because it doesn't have very much downside, you're basically, though, then buying when risk is low. Usually when the market is low and price, volatility is low. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you want to adjust these things. But as long as the utility sort of sticks to the script, as I've dubbed it here, where you recognize the script has to itself get reevaluated over time, that is prudent hedging. And it has nothing to do with whether the hedges ended up in or out of the money at the end of the year. So that's what I got.
Okay, great. Thank you, Frank. That was a super segue into focusing more on the financial risks associated with volatility.
Right.
Do I have any hands? Okay, Commissioner Ellison, go right ahead.
You're muted. There we go.
Hi, Mr. Graves. Nice to see you again. Appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to see you.
I did want to briefly follow up on a couple of things. Your discussion of call options, I thought was very interesting and appropriate. In general, I think I'm less concerned about, whether winter gas is, maybe $5 or $8 or $10, but I'm really concerned that it could go to $50 or $100.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm wondering is, in your experience, what the pricing is for call options for gas for, say, $20 or $30 per million BTU, whether those are expensive or not.
Right. A great question. Yeah, and we have certainly had some stunning price spikes, as you know. The trouble with them is usually we don't expect them to be that bad until we're in the middle of them. So even for Storm Uri, for instance, if you would try to buy a $20 call option, that would have been pretty far out of the money if you bought it in, say, December before the February 14th, freeze off. And you wouldn't have had to pay very much money for it. But at that time, even though we were starting to hear forecasts of extreme weather being likely in early winter, that would have been a cheap call. And you would have probably expected that you probably wouldn't use it. Let's say gas gets to $15, which would have still been pretty cold. Your $20 call option would have expired out of the money, and you wouldn't have used it. So the trouble is, by the time they're there, you have a $200 gas. Your problem is getting gas, period, not getting a call option on gas at that point. So I would say if you're really worried about extremes, it is worth thinking about finding some inexpensive way out of the money calls for a small portion of your load to just take the sting off of. Let's say you have to cover 1% extra. What you'd want to think about there is how much more would my demand be if it gets super cold than even the design peak that I'm already covered for. So if you think you have enough gas through your other contracts and positions to cover what you've got, but you think you might have 3% more demand if it gets really cold, or in case of Uri was sort of 10 or 15%, but they couldn't serve it. Then you'd want to be buying out of the money calls for that surge beyond the super peak. Not many people do that. I'll tell you what, that's pretty uncommon practice, or at least I haven't seen it much. That's a good one to throw to our next speaker, would have a better perspective on that than me.
Thank you. And just one other brief question. Is there a rule of thumb for the amount of physical storage a gas LDC should have?
A lot of utilities trying to have something like, a good portion, a third or a half of their winter average, their winter needs feasible to serve that way. That depends a lot on geography, whether you're in a good place to get that amount of storage. The other thing is it matters a little bit about how hard it is to go upstream reliably, because local storage is a substitute for transportation from year-round transportation upstream. So you can fill that maybe interruptibly during the summer, and then have firm capacity from your storage to your demand. And you've avoided a capacity, a transportation asset at the same time as you created a peaking asset. So that depends a lot on how far you have to go. In New Mexico, I wouldn't think the upstream capacity risk is very high, and might not be saving you much to have storage locally anyway. I think your storage is even pretty far upstream too, but I'm a little rusty on that. But
right, in Texas,
it's a physical trade-off as well as a financial.
Right, great, thank you.
Okay, great. I don't see any other hands, and we'll have more time for questions later as it comes up. So let's move into our National Grid speaker. We have John Protano. John, go ahead and take it away.
Hello. So yes, I guess, can you hear me okay? I know we've been having some issues. Okay. Perfect. So I just want to start off by thanking Mr. Dykes and Mr. Gray, certainly doing much of the heavy lifting there, kind of walking us through the different components of the market. I was going to focus a little bit more on our interactions and what we do, what we look at, and really what we do as a company. So if we can go to the next slide, I just really have one slide here that we'll focus on. So essentially, just to start with, at the bottom there, our jurisdictions for National Grid are New York and Massachusetts. For New York, it's downstate, which is Brooklyn Union and also Long Island. And then we also have portions of upstate New York as well that we do hedge our natural gas for. And for Massachusetts, it would be for Boston Gas. So just keep that in mind. That's pretty much our footprint, and we do work very closely with the regulators in each of those jurisdictions. So if we can go, I guess we'll just go right to that top bullet there. The objective of our hedge program is to reduce the price volatility for firm customers at the lowest cost. Now, I want to just point out, Mr. Graves earlier mentioned that there is that balance between costs and reducing volatility. So when I talk about cost here, we're looking at a couple different things. We want to get the transactions at the best possible price for the customers. So in other words, we want to make sure that we're going out in the marketplace and getting the price, that is there. In other words, we want to know what the price is. We're not going to pay up for a price and have that higher cost trickle down to the customer. That's one component of cost. The other would be the hedge losses would be the other aspect of that. So in other words, if we lock in hedges at certain prices, and this is in particular financial, and we'll go into the particulars of each of these in a little bit, but if we lock into fixed price swaps and the market does come down considerably, we could have some significant losses or costs to the customer. So it is really a very delicate balance, and it is one that we do work very closely with our regulators to kind of address those issues and concerns. And each jurisdiction is different, has a different level of I guess, desire they'd like us to hedge. So it really is specific to the jurisdiction. And the reason that is so important is because we are working closely with the regulators. So we do present them with a plan in which we are going to hedge. So we want to make sure that we are going to hedge in accordance with that plan. So if we could just look at that next bullet there, the hedge program high-level details. So we're looking at weather normal forecasts. So we have various groups internally that we work very, very closely with. So certainly not just a hedging group, I guess, effort. It is our planning group, our physical traders, our forecasting team, our middle office. We have many, many different groups that really work together to make sure that this is done as most cost effectively as possible. So what we would do, we start off with a weather normal demand forecast, and that's provided to us from both our forecasting team and our planners. And generally, we have a specific volume of decatherms that they're looking to hedge for a particular winter. So we are looking at currently we're looking to execute for winter of 25-26. So I say winter, it's really only on the natural gas side, we only hedge winter. So in New York, it's the November through March period. And in Massachusetts, it's the November through April period for obvious reasons. So we're looking to begin executing our hedges essentially this May, so next month, for the winter 25-26 period. And what we've determined as to be most effective is dollar cost averaging. So what that means is we're purchasing ratable volumes each month. We are essentially price takers at these very specific days over the course of the month. So wherever the prices are on those days, that's where we will go ahead and execute those transactions. And we do, like I said, we want to make sure we get the lowest price. So we are going out into the marketplace and really kind of the way in which we do it is we have, I call it like a mini RFP, where we're going out to certain customers that we've, I guess, counterparties that we have agreements in place with already. So we're reaching out to pretty much all of those all at once and indicating that we'd like to execute a specific volume at for a specific month, and please give us your best price at a certain time. Now, that is purely the financial component. So the physical is a little bit different. There's a few different components with the physical, so it's kind of difficult to kind of delineate between the two, I guess, in this conversation, but I'll get to that in a moment. I just want to just round off the next section there, that the targets, our hedge targets, are monitored internally because we do want to make sure that we have cost recovery. So we have our middle office that sends out weekly risk reports that are monitoring our hedge targets over the course of our hedge period. I'm not quite sure if I mentioned it. It is a 16-month period in which we are hedging. So we're essentially executing 1/16 for each month starting May for that winter period. So a nicer way of saying that is dollar cost averaging, similar to what you would do with let's say a retirement plan, where you're just purchasing each paycheck and kind of attributing that to the end goal. So I guess moving on to the next the next bullet, hedge instrument. So there's many different discussions that we can have here. I think that Mr. Dykes had a very nice slide talking about the essentially the all the various types of components that went into here. So I think mainly we're looking at things from a financial and physical perspective. So financial is just a swap or an option that we would go out and purchase in the marketplace. It is financial, so if it's a swap, we're purchasing at a fixed price, and we're receiving a floating price at some point in the future. In this case, it would be for the specific winter period. And then we're also looking at options as well, a combination of call options or also collars, which is a purchase of a call and a sale of a put option, just to kind of accommodate or reduce the costs that we would spend on the options. And we do look at those instruments at both NYMEX as well as basis locations. So basis locations would essentially be at locations along the pipelines or at various price points in the market. So we tend to kind of align our hedges with our sources of supply. So if they're from the Gulf, then generally we'll look at NYMEX swaps or options. And if there's a portion through, let's say, Marcellus, we'll look at certain locations that correlate with Marcellus. The physical component that we do have is really just one of the physical components is where we have natural gas in storage, and this is really from the hedge point of view. So this is included in our hedge target with the with those targets that we've discussed with our regulators. So generally, the ratio would be maybe 20 to 30% physical and 20 to 30 or 40% financial, depending on the jurisdiction. So overall, we would hedge to maybe 50 or 60% of the weather normal forecast. So with that, though, it does leave risk. There's always risk. It's impossible to offset every risk, and certainly there are costs involved as well. But generally, we are, because we are hedging to the weather normal forecast. There is risk of weather verifying much colder than normal, and if that does happen, it could indicate that our hedges were not as effective because we on our on a shorter term we would be out in the marketplace purchasing higher volumes at higher prices. So, but our regulators generally do want to have that price diversity. So the objective is to not mitigate all of the volatility in the price. We do want to have, it is important that the customers do see or feel some of that price sensitivity, because that would in turn spur them to adjust their usage accordingly. So generally, if there are higher prices in the marketplace, they would kind of lower their thermostats or use less gas. I think that's all that I had really. We just as I said, it's an effort that we do with many different groups here, and we do monitor our hedge targets accordingly as well. So I could leave it here. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything at this time.
Super, great. Thank you so much, John. And what I want to do now, while we see if there's any other questions for you, is circle back to the question that we had received in the chat at the beginning from Charlie Inman from Washington. And his question, and this is for you, John, or for Frank or Larry as well. It's how should a utility entity handle volatility in states where natural gas is being phased out? I don't know if anyone wants to grab that